And now, of course, the scripture reading is from 1 Samuel, verses 1 to 10. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel," and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The gospel lesson is from John 1, verses 43 to 51. John tells the story of the call of Nathanael, a disciple not mentioned anywhere else. Perhaps it's because Nathanael's response to Jesus isn't like the others. Nathanael is a skeptic, and Jesus knows it. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened up and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." The word of God.
Sometimes where you think you're going with something isn't exactly where you end up. I think we've all had that experience, and we all recognize that's true. It's one of the reasons why I like this Hindu proverb that's on the screen behind me. Another reason I like this proverb is because it really speaks to me about something which is a fundamental thing that I believe, which is there is one God. We come to that God different ways. We may know that God by different names. We may travel different paths to that God, but there is one God. We come different ways. That's the part I like about it. I also like the idea that I like the idea that telling someone that their path is not the right path is something which I'm sure we're all familiar with at some point in our lives. And that truly is a person who's wasting the time because they're not on a path. They're simply running around all the other ones. I like that part too. The part I'm a little uncomfortable with, because it kind of depends on how you interpret it, but the part that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with is it doesn't matter which path you take. Because yes, it does. It just depends on the perspective you have when you're on it. Because your path is your path. Once you're on it, it is your path. So it does matter because it's yours. It doesn't matter in the sense that we can all have different paths, and that's okay. But it does matter in the sense that it is your path. I think that's very important. What's even more important is how you get on that path. There's two ways you get on that path, and two things are important about how you get on that path. One is that you take a step forward. There's a wonderful, it's actually, the book itself is really great too, but the title of the book is even better. There's a wonderful book that's called We Make the Road by Walking. And it's a series of meditations for the year that kind of carries you through the year. But the idea that we make the road by walking, every step you take creates a road, I think is a wonderful image to remind us that we always go forward. We should always go forward. So first of all, you got to take a step and get on the path. So how do you do that? Well, we have two wonderful examples this morning of how you might get on the path to God. One is a call story of Samuel, who hears a voice, doesn't recognize it until someone says you should just listen and maybe find out. And the voice says basically the same thing Jesus says to the disciples in the story that we all know so well, the story of Jesus coming to the lakeshore. There's the fisherman, and he says, "Follow me." And they all drop everything and follow him. I don't want to talk about that too much, frankly, because I'm going to talk about it next week. But the point is, call, response. I said follow, you follow. The voice of authority causes you to step out. What that authority is all about is something we're going to discuss at another time, but you are called, you follow. The other story that we heard this morning is a little bit different. It's a story in John. And we're just actually hearing the back end of this story. But in John's gospel, the first disciples aren't fishermen. The first disciples are followers of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist sees Jesus and goes, "That's the guy right there. That's the guy I've been telling you about. Go and follow him." And two of his disciples do. And they follow Jesus around. In the bit that's before what we heard today, they follow Jesus around. And finally, Jesus goes, "Are you guys stalking me?" Or words to that effect. And they say, John told, we're honestly, we just want to see what's going on. And Jesus says, "Well, then come and see." It's less a command and more an invitation. Come and see. And they do. They follow him around, they see what's going on, and they decide to follow him and be part of what he's doing. The next day, Jesus goes to Galilee, and he sees Philip, who, by the way, is related. He's from the same place as the two guys that were following Jesus around. And Philip follows Jesus. Then Philip goes to a friend of his, Nathanael, and says, "Look, we found the guy. We found the guy." And Nathanael, of course, immediately goes, "Awesome, let's do it." Because that's the response you get when you invite people to church, right? That's not what Nathanael says. Nathanael says the classic, how could anything good come from Nazareth? He doesn't believe that. Here's two important features of that story. Number one is, come and see is an important way to learn to follow. How will you know if you don't come and see? And the other piece is, when you invite someone to come and see, they don't always want to. And there could be lots of reasons for that. In this story, it's because, well, nothing good can come from Calgary. Nazareth. But nothing good. He's already assumed there's nothing good about Jesus because of where he's from. That's not really a whole lot different than inviting someone to come to church and they're going to say no because at some point in the past they've had either a really negative experience of being at church, or they've never been to church, but they read all about it. You know, what terrible things the church does and how they're controlling and they do this and that and everything else. It's a bad place, I don't want to go there. How do you know? Well, I read it in the, come and see. Whenever you invite somebody to be part of something, always say, come and see. Tell them all about it. Tell them why it's important to you. But invite them to come and see for themselves. I think I love this story so much more than the calling of the disciples to be fishers of people. There are so many things in that story that raise questions for me, like why'd they drop everything and go? What exactly do you mean by fish for people? Don't worry, we're going to talk about that next week. The important thing in this story is Jesus says, come and see, and then someone else does too. Philip doesn't just go and say, come on, you have to. He says, come and see. I know you already have an opinion, but come and see what's going on. Nathanael is not convinced. And then he meets Jesus. And Jesus says, I know you. And I was reading something the other day that suggested that that phrase about, I saw you sitting under the fig tree, is actually one of those sort of Bible speak things that actually doesn't mean he literally saw him sitting under a fig tree. It means more along the lines of, I've seen you doing things. I've seen you be involved in stuff. So I kind of know you a bit. And Nathanael follows him. Come and see, and we'll find out. Interestingly, though, Nathanael's only mentioned in John's Gospel. He's mentioned one more time. I should say he is mentioned one more time right at the end of John's Gospel. But he's not mentioned in any of the other Gospels as one of the 12. So he may not have been one of the 12. He might have been some just random follower, because Jesus had many. He also had many people who didn't follow. Once again, remember, Jesus didn't invite everyone and then have everyone follow. Jesus invited everyone, and some did. Some didn't. Some chose not to. I'm sure they all had their reasons. Maybe, their kids were playing hockey, or that's their only day off, or they have plans, or, they sleep in. Do those sound familiar? The thing about that is, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they don't want to know more or be part of things. We have this sort of idea that if you don't want to come to church on Sunday morning at 10:30, you obviously don't want to be part of things. Why would we assume that? Probably because for 2,000 years we've met on Sunday mornings but not everybody does. Now, we're now starting to realize you don't have to actually be here on Sunday morning at 10:30 to be part of the family. Yes, I used the F word. To be part of the family, you just need to be part of things somehow. It doesn't have to be Sunday morning at 10:30. And that's another thing, it's kind of a sidebar part of this story, but it's another thing that's important to remember. Nathanael may not have been one of the 12. So we're just going to dismiss it? No, He would have been a follower of Jesus. He probably would have shared things with other people. It doesn't necessarily mean he was there every second of the way or on Sunday mornings at 10:30. But maybe he was part of things in a different way. Doesn't mean he's still not part of the family. This is the point where all week long I was going totally in a different direction, and this is the point where I'm now going in a completely different direction, because I posted my blog the other day, and some people read it and started a conversation about the fact that I had used the word family. And that may not necessarily be the best thing, although they did acknowledge that in the context of what I was saying, I was suggesting that we do away with the word fellowship and we start saying familyship. And my argument for that was based on the idea that fellowship, first of all, fellowship is not completely inclusive, but also that word fellowship has been used in many other different ways, and it's kind of lost its path a little bit. And we need a new way, something that's more inclusive, something that reminds people what it really means to get together. And so I suggested familyship as an alternative. And this little discussion started amongst 4 or 5 people, 2 of whom are ministers, who raised some questions about the use of the word family in the context of the church, because lots of people don't have positive experiences of family. And my response to that is to say, yes, that's true. Why does that mean I can't use the word? And here's why I say that, is because like everything else in church, we have this idea that the moment you describe something, you mean an ideal. The ideal family, everyone gets along, it's all good, nice, warm, happy fuzzies. That's not how it works, is it? No. In fact, in many ways, the churches generally have been a fine example of dysfunctional families for quite some time. The point is that when we're a family, you can argue, you can disagree, you can be different, but you figure out a way to keep yourselves together, right? Or you don't. It's not perfect, but we're like that too. When I talk about the church being like a family, I don't mean it's perfect. I mean, when we disagree about things, we find a way to work it out. When people are different, we don't send them away, we welcome them in because they're part of the family. And whether you use that as family, meaning part of this congregation, the United Church of Canada, the church generally, or even just the family of Jesus or the family of God, however you use that expression, you're implying a bond that is greater than simply, I'm a member of the congregation. There's nothing wrong with that. Please, by all means, be a member. In fact, Paul uses that language quite extensively to describe the church, right? We are all members of one body. But when you say family, there's more to it. There's a bond. There's a bond that is greater than disagreement. There's a bond that's greater than anger. There's a bond that's greater than difference. There's a bond. Family of God, that bond is God. The other thing I like about this Hindu proverb is all the paths lead to the same place, right? There is many, many ways to God. But it's a mountain. You have to travel it. You have to get there. The one God, we are all members of that. God is literally the mountain you are traveling on. We're all part of that. So there's 2 things about that for me. One is, first of all, that traveling the path is important. It is important to come and see. It absolutely is. It's also important to remember that we come and see not necessarily just by ourselves. And that's where this idea of familyship comes from for me, is that we travel together. We come and see together. Maybe not all however many billion there are on the planet at the same time to the same idea, but in smaller groups like this. Smaller groups like this, members of the choir. Smaller groups like the UCW. Smaller groups like the people who work in the thrift store. Smaller groups like the people who might just come to a Bible study or a discussion group. That dynamic of remembering that we are all connected applies in all of those situations because we are literally all connected. We come and see together. We are connected. And whether we feel that we are called to a specific task, whether we hear that call as, I heard a voice and I answered. Whether we hear that call in the context of a group as traveling together and seeing things, experiencing, sharing those things, we're traveling that path connected as a family. Tomorrow is, I think it's tomorrow, is Martin Luther King Day in the U.S. And I read an interesting story about Martin Luther King this week, which is that there was a point, he writes that there was a point in his journey as a leader of a movement where he didn't feel he had anything left. He couldn't do any more. He was out of energy, he was out of enthusiasm, he was not inspired any longer. And he tells a story about sitting at the kitchen table and feeling like, I don't know what to do now because if I show up tomorrow and I don't have the energy and enthusiasm that people need to see to carry them forward, they also will feel the way I feel. They will also start to give up. And he talks about sitting there at the kitchen table and how he literally had given up. And he heard a voice. And the voice said, don't give up. He heard God, he says, say, don't give up. Justice is important. Equality is important. The care of my children is important. He heard a voice, and it inspired him to go out the next day and keep going. What I think is particularly cool about that story is that it combines the two things together. King was doing what he was doing because he was inspired by people and the people that he was with, that he was part of a family that needed help, a family that needed justice, a family that needed something. And in his weakest moment, he hears a voice. So there's the combination of these two stories. A call from God and a call from God through all of us. If you ask, quite often people do, ask ministers to tell their call story, that's what they call it. What's your call story? There are surely ministers I know who will tell you that they heard a voice and they said, yes, Lord, what can I do? I have no doubt there are. For many, though, me included, it was a long process that involved a little bit of running away, a little bit of participating in things, a little bit of life experience, that's why so many ministers come to ministry later in life as well. Is that call it causes them to travel a different path. And it feels a little bit different. It feels like something we have done together. That's how I would describe it. I didn't hear a voice. I heard lots of them, and my own together that brought me here. That's why the idea of familyship is so important to me. Am I done with that? No, I am not, because as somebody pointed out in this little discussion we were having, family does have difficult connotations for lots of people, and having the opportunity to explain it is great, but if you don't have the opportunity to explain it, you just have the one word, it's still a problem. Then, of course, we all realized what was actually happening, which was exactly what needs to happen. We were having conversation about it and realizing that it may evolve into something else. That maybe we're not saying fellowship anymore, maybe we're saying familyship or not, but maybe in a while we're going to say something else because it was evolving through conversation. We were working it together. That's what we do. Sometimes it's a voice. Sometimes it's a single voice that inspires. But sometimes it's the group together. It's the family working together. The important thing is to take the step on the path that takes you up the mountain. We travel together. There is one God. We come many ways, but there is one God.